At a corporate party, my daughter-in-law Victoria publicly called me a leech, while my son David stood by, silent. She thinks I'm a burden, struggling to get by. What she doesn't know is the secret I've kept for 5 years, a secret that makes me the true power behind everything. I just smiled. This leech is about to bite back. Like, share, and let us know where you are listening from to hear how I reclaim my dignity. The clinking of champagne flutes and the hum of polite conversation usually soothe Eleanor, but tonight the sounds grated on her nerves. She stood in a quiet corner of the opulent ballroom, a silent observer at the annual Westbrook Technologies gala. Her modest, sensible dress, a muted navy blue, felt like a costume amidst the shimmering silks and tailored tuxedos. She watched her son David beam with pride as he accepted accolades on stage, his hand often resting on his wife Victoria's slender arm. Victoria, a vision in emerald green, radiated an air of effortless sophistication and undeniable power, the kind Eleanor had once commanded without a second thought. Public humiliation. Eleanor is called a leech by Victoria at a corporate party, endured silently by her son David. Later, as David navigated the crowd, introducing Victoria to various influential figures, they approached Eleanor's quiet spot. David's smile faltered slightly as he made the introduction, a quick, almost imperceptible glance darting from his wife to his mother. Victoria offered a tight smile, her eyes quickly assessing Eleanor's simple attire before sweeping past her. "This is Eleanor, David's mother," Victoria announced, her voice a little too loud, a little too saccharine. Then leaning in close to a prominent board member, just enough for Eleanor to hear, she chuckled conspiratorially. "Sweet woman, but you know how it is. Some people just latch on, don't they? A real leech, if you will, living off her son's success." The words were a venomous whisper, intended to sting, intended to publicly define Eleanor's existence. Eleanor's breath caught in her throat. She saw David wince, a faint flush rising on his neck, but he said nothing, offering only a weak, apologetic smile to the board member before quickly moving Victoria away, leaving Eleanor rooted to the spot, the cruel word echoing in the cavernous space. Internal conflict. Eleanor's cheeks burn with humiliation. She reflects on Arthur's death 5 years prior and her perceived burden. A wave of humiliation washed over Eleanor, hot and suffocating. Her cheeks burned, not just from the insult, but from the searing pain of David's silence. 5 years. 5 years since Arthur, her beloved husband, and the visionary founder of Westbrook Technologies, had passed away. 5 years she had meticulously upheld his last wish, enduring this public charade. This perception of her is a burden, a woman clinging to the periphery of her son's glamorous life. The irony was a bitter taste on her tongue. Arthur had built this empire from scratch, and in his death, he had entrusted its true stewardship to her. Yet here she was, enduring the scorn of a woman who wore a diamond necklace that could have financed Eleanor's comfortable, unassuming life for decades. Bathroom revelation. In the restroom, Eleanor clutches her modest handbag, staring at her reflection, knowing the truth of her majority ownership, 51%, of Westbrook Technologies. She sought refuge in the opulent restroom, its marble counters and gilded mirrors a stark contrast to her own humble bathroom at home. The air was thick with expensive perfumes and the hushed whispers of women reapplying their lipstick. Eleanor moved to an empty sink, her reflection staring back at her. A woman with lines etched by time and a quiet strength in her eyes, but also a hint of deep sorrow. She clutched her modest, practical handbag, a simple leather tote that held only essentials, a stark contrast to the designer clutches dotting the vanity. Looking at herself, a faint, almost imperceptible smile touched her lips. They called her a leech. If only they knew. If only they knew that the very empire they lauded David for leading, Westbrook Technologies, was hers. All of it. Not just a part, but a controlling interest. 51% precisely. A secret held tight, a power patiently waiting. Arthur's promise. She recalls Arthur's deathbed wish. Don't tell David. Let him make his own way. Her mind drifted back to Arthur's deathbed, the scent of antiseptic thick in the air. His hand, frail and transparent, had clutched hers. "Eleanor," he had whispered, his voice barely audible. The company is yours. 51%. Not David's, not yet. He's too young, too eager. He needs to learn. He needs to earn his stripes, to build his own legacy, not simply step into mine. Don't tell him. Let him make his own way. Watch him, guide him, but from the shadows. Let him earn it. Eleanor had nodded, tears streaming down her face, promising to honor his final request, a promise that had shaped the last 5 years of her life. Years of silence. Eleanor has honored the promise, living simply, attending board meetings via proxy, and watching David climb the ladder on his own merit. And honor it she had. She had retreated from the public eye, selling their grand estate and moving into a comfortable but unostentatious two-bedroom home in a quiet suburb. She wore practical clothes, drove a sensible sedan, and cultivated a life of unassuming normalcy. No one, not even David, suspected her true role. She attended board meetings, not in person, but through her trusted legal counsel, Mr. Davies, who quietly cast her decisive proxy votes, always guiding the company toward Arthur's original vision. She watched David from afar, seeing him stumble, learn, and eventually thrive. Her heart swelled with pride as he climbed the corporate ladder, earning every promotion, every accolade, believing it was purely his own merit. Victoria's disdain. She remembers welcoming Victoria despite her clear disdain for Eleanor's modest life. She remembered the day David had first brought Victoria home, a dazzling young woman with ambitious eyes and an undeniable aura of entitlement. Eleanor had welcomed her warmly, seeing the light in David's eyes. But Victoria had barely concealed her disdain for Eleanor's humble abode, her simple meals, her complete lack of ostentation. There had been subtle digs, thinly veiled criticisms of Eleanor's lack of ambition or her quaint lifestyle. While Eleanor had merely smiled, a private amusement dancing in her eyes, knowing the truth that Victoria was blind to. Bridge club facade. Victoria mocks Eleanor's bridge club, unaware its meetings with her financial advisor about Westbrook's performance. Victoria frequently mocked Eleanor's supposed bridge club. "Still off to your little bridge club, Eleanor?" she'd ask, a sneer barely hidden beneath a faux polite smile. It's rather sweet, really, to have such simple pleasures. What Victoria didn't know was that Eleanor's bridge club was her weekly meeting with Mr. Davies, her financial advisor and confidant. These were not casual chats over cards, but intense discussions about Westbrook Technologies' quarterly performance, market trends, and strategic acquisitions. While Victoria and David celebrated their ostensible triumphs, Eleanor was quietly pulling the strings, ensuring the company's sustained growth and stability. Overheard conversation, Eleanor overhears Victoria telling David, "She's embarrassing, David. People are going to think you come from..." Returning from the restroom, Eleanor decided to grab a glass of water before heading home. She paused near a towering potted palm, momentarily out of sight. That's when she heard their voices. Victoria's, sharp and insistent, and David's, weary. "She's embarrassing, David," Victoria hissed, her voice laced with disgust. "People are going to think you come from nothing, a charity case. It reflects poorly on us, on you." The words pierced Eleanor's heart like daggers. She felt a cold dread settle in her stomach. David's weakness, David sighs. "She's my mother, Victoria," but agrees to talk to her about a retirement community. David sighed, a sound of resignation that twisted Eleanor's gut. "She's my mother, Victoria," he murmured, his voice lacking any real conviction, any defense of her. "I know, darling, I know," Victoria cooed, her tone suddenly saccharine. "But we have to think about appearances, don't we? And her comfort, of course. Perhaps it's time she moved somewhere more appropriate. A lovely retirement community, perhaps, with activities and round-the-clock care. It would be for the best. For everyone. You'll talk to her, won't you, David?" David paused, a long, agonizing silence. Then, with another weary sigh, he capitulated. "Yes," he said, his voice flat. "I'll talk to her." A mother's decision. Eleanor, heartbroken, decides to call Mr. Davies. Arthur never foresaw Victoria's poison. Heartbreak was a physical ache in Eleanor's chest. A retirement community. Cast aside. Her own son silently agreeing to remove her from his life, to box her away like an inconvenient relic. Arthur's noble wish, his desire for David to forge his own path, had been twisted and corrupted by Victoria's insidious influence. He had never foreseen this calculated cruelty. Tears stung her eyes, but a new resolve hardened her expression. The time for silent endurance was over. The promise to Arthur had been honored. Now a new promise would be made. She would call Mr. Davies first thing in the morning. Reclaiming dignity, she walks to her modest home, a strange calm settling. The Leech was about to show her teeth. Eleanor walked out of the ballroom past the glittering facade and into the cool night air. The city lights blurred around her as she made her way to her modest car, the insults and betrayals echoing in her mind. But beneath the pain, a strange, quiet calm settled over her. The years of playing the innocent, the unassuming, the Leech were over. It was time for the truth to come out, not with a bang, but with a precise, calculated strike. The Leech was about to show her teeth. The morning after the gala, Eleanor sat in her sun-drenched living room, a mug of chamomile tea warming her hands. Her eyes were fixed on a faded photograph displayed on a small side table. It was a picture of her and Arthur taken decades ago. She was 26, radiant and full of youthful ambition, her dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. Arthur, 30, with a mischievous glint in his eyes and an unshakable belief in their future, stood proudly beside her. They were standing in front of a modest storefront, a freshly painted sign above them proclaiming Westbrook Technologies in bold, hopeful letters. That tiny space had been their first office, the crucible where their dreams had been forged. Founding dreams. Eleanor gazes at a photo of her and Arthur, 26 and 30, opening the first Westbrook Technologies office. Looking at the photo, Eleanor felt a pang of nostalgia, a bittersweet ache for the simplicity and boundless hope of those early days. They had been young, idealistic, and ridiculously in love, fueled by caffeine and an unwavering conviction that they could build something extraordinary. This empire, now worth billions, had started with two eager minds, a handful of borrowed equipment, and an unshakable commitment to each other's vision. They had built it brick by painstaking brick, code by meticulous line, and now it felt like an alien entity, twisted by the very people who benefited most from its existence. Mr. Davies' visit. Mr. Davies arrives concerned. Eleanor recounts Victoria's cruelty and David's plans. A discreet knock on the door pulled Eleanor from her reverie. It was Mr. Davies, her loyal legal counsel, his usually stoic face etched with concern. She had called him late last night, her voice trembling with a quiet fury he hadn't heard in years. He settled into the armchair opposite her, his briefcase resting beside him. Eleanor recounted the events of the gala, the public humiliation, Victoria's venomous whisper, and David's passive acceptance of the plan to shunt her off to a retirement community. Her voice was steady, but the pain was evident in the tremor of her hands. Mr. Davies listened intently, his expression darkening with each revelation. Arthur's legacy versus disrespect. Mr. Davies suggests telling David, arguing, Arthur never intended Eleanor to be disrespected. Eleanor, Mr. Davies finally said, his voice gentle but firm, Arthur's intention was for David to find his own way, to earn his success. He never, not for a moment, envisioned you being treated with such blatant disrespect, such cruelty. He wouldn't have wanted you to endure this. Perhaps it's time to tell David the truth, to remind him and Victoria of the true legacy. Eleanor shook her head slowly. Not yet. Arthur's wish was absolute. But I need to do something. This cannot continue. Goss company's value. He shows Eleanor the quarterly report. Her shares are worth triple, enough to buy 10 mansions bigger than whatever house Victoria's showing off. Mr. Davies opened his briefcase, pulling out a sleek tablet. I think you should see this, he said, turning the screen towards her. It was the latest quarterly report for Westbrook Technologies. He scrolled through, highlighting a section. Your shares, Eleanor, your 51%. They've tripled in value since Arthur's passing. The company is performing exceptionally well, thanks to the foundation you both built and the decisions we've made together. Based on current market evaluations, your stake is now worth enough to buy. Well, to put it simply, 10 mansions bigger than whatever house Victoria is currently showing off as David's success. Eleanor stared at the figures, a detached sense of awe filling her. She hadn't been paying close attention to the exact numbers, only to the overall health of the company. The sheer scale of it was staggering. Humble beginnings. Eleanor shares her story, meeting Arthur as a receptionist computer repairman, living in a leaky apartment, fixing computers in their kitchen. "Do you remember our beginnings, Mr. Davies?" Eleanor mused, her eyes drifting back to the photograph. "Arthur and I met when I was a receptionist at a tiny tech firm, and he was the eccentric genius who'd fix the office computers. He saw potential, no one else did. We fell in love over circuit boards and late-night coding sessions. Our first home was a tiny, leaky apartment above a bakery. We'd fix computers right there on our kitchen table, the smell of burnt sugar often mingling with the faint scent of ozone." She smiled wistfully. "We had nothing really, but we had each other and a shared dream." Sacrifice and growth. They saved every penny, built the company. Eleanor worked until her water broke and was back with baby David 3 weeks later. Every penny we earned went back into Westbrook. We lived on instant noodles and pure ambition. There were days we wondered if we'd made a terrible mistake. But Arthur's vision was infectious. I handled everything else. The accounts, the customer service, the marketing. I worked until my water broke with David. 3 weeks after he was born, I was back in that little office, David sleeping in a bassinet next to my desk, answering calls and coding. We built this company with our blood, sweat, and every fiber of our beings. Protecting David's path. They hid their ownership, selling their home to fund David's college, wanting him to find his own path. When Westbrook started to take off, we made a conscious decision, Eleanor continued, her voice softer now. We wanted David to grow up with a normal childhood, free from the pressures of immense wealth. We sold our original, larger home, putting the proceeds into a trust fund for David's education and future. We pretended we were a modest, middle-class family, even though the company was thriving. We wanted him to forge his own identity, to find his own passion, not to feel obligated to step into Arthur's shoes. We wanted him to know the value of hard work, to understand what it meant to earn something for himself. Arthur's dying wish. Eleanor tearfully recalls Arthur's final request. Don't tell David about the shares. His success needed to be his own. Her eyes welled with tears as she recalled Arthur's final moments. On his deathbed, he reiterated it so clearly. Eleanor, he'd gasped, don't tell David about the shares. Not yet. Let him build his own name, his own success. He's a good boy, but he needs to earn it, to understand the weight of this company. His success needed to be his own. Guide him, protect him, but let him find his way. Her voice cracked with emotion. I promised him, Mr. Davies. I promised. Inheritance arrangement. Eleanor explains how Arthur's shares were transferred, with a small portion for David at 40. And you've honored that promise impeccably, Mr. Davies affirmed gently. As per Arthur's meticulously drafted will, his 51% of Westbrook Technologies was transferred directly to you. David received a smaller, significant but not controlling portion of the company's shares to be fully vested upon his 40th birthday, which is still several years away. Arthur was very particular about those clauses, designed to empower David without handing him everything on a silver platter. He truly believed in nurturing David's journey, not merely funding it. Victoria's influence. She notes Victoria's ambition, seeing David as her ticket to the life she wants. Eleanor sighed. Arthur never met Victoria. He wouldn't have imagined her influence. She sees David not just as her husband, but as her ticket to the life she wants. She's driven by ambition, Mr. Davies, an ambition that blinds her to everything else, even basic human decency. Reviewing options. Mr. Davies states, legally the company is yours to control as you see fit. Eleanor feels a quiet determination. It was time for some changes. Mr. Davies closed the quarterly report. Legally, Eleanor, the company is yours to control as you see fit. You are the majority shareholder. You dictate the direction, the leadership, and ultimately, the future of Westbrook Technologies. David, despite his position as CEO, serves at your pleasure, whether he knows it or not. Eleanor nodded, a quiet determination settling deep within her. The ache in her chest still lingered, but it was now laced with a steely resolve. Arthur's wish for David to earn his way would still be honored, but Victoria's poisonous influence would no longer be tolerated. It was time for some changes, big changes. 2 days later, Eleanor found herself standing in the gleaming, ultra-modern lobby of Westbrook Technologies headquarters. Her simple, well-maintained floral dress and practical shoes felt jarringly out of place amidst the sleek, minimalist design and the impeccably dressed employees bustling through the space. She carried a modest brown paper bag containing David's favorite homemade chicken salad sandwich, a small gesture of maternal affection. The young receptionist, a woman with perfectly sculpted eyebrows and an air of detached disdain, glanced at Eleanor's attire, her judgment almost palpable, before she reluctantly announced Eleanor's arrival to David. Undercover visit. Eleanor visits Westbrook Technologies headquarters, bringing David lunch, noting reception's judgment of her modest clothes. Eleanor observed the hushed reverence in the lobby, the way employees carried themselves with an almost religious devotion to the brand. This was Arthur's vision, now a thriving behemoth, and in the very heart of it, she was still an outsider, a leech in her daughter-in-law's dismissive words. The receptionist's haughty look, as she informed David's assistant of his mother's presence, was a stark reminder of the social chasm Victoria had so carefully constructed. David's discomfort. David appears surprised and something like discomfort, leading her to a break room to avoid colleagues seeing his unfashionable mother. A few minutes later, David emerged, his tall frame cutting a distinguished figure in his tailored suit. His smile, though polite, didn't quite reach his eyes. He looked genuinely surprised, and Eleanor noted with a fresh sting of pain, something like discomfort flickered across his face. "Mother," he said, a little too loudly, before lowering his voice. "What a surprise. Is everything all right?" He ushered her quickly towards a less conspicuous corridor, away from the glass-walled offices and curious glances. "Let's go to the break room," he suggested, his tone implying a need for privacy. But Eleanor knew it was to avoid any of his colleagues seeing his unfashionable mother in the midst of their corporate elegance. David's pressure. David, he looks tired, mentioning big project. Victoria's been stressed too. She's got her heart set on that house in Lakewood Estates. In the small, sterile break room, David seemed to relax slightly. He accepted the lunch bag with a grateful smile, though his eyes still held a weariness Eleanor hadn't noticed before. "Thanks, Mom," he said, sinking into a chair. "This is good. I haven't had time for a proper lunch." He rubbed his temples. "It's been a crazy week. Big project coming up. A major expansion into the Asian market. Victoria's been stressed too. She's got her heart set on that new house in Lakewood Estates, and it's a big investment. She's been pushing hard for this deal to go through." Victoria's ambition, David confesses, Victoria says it's the right neighborhood. She's already talking to designers. Eleanor listened, observing the subtle lines of strain around his eyes. "Lakewood Estates is quite exclusive, isn't it?" she asked gently. David nodded, taking a bite of his sandwich. "It is. Victoria says it's the right neighborhood for our position now, for appearances. She's already talking to designers about renovations, even before we've secured the deal." He let out a soft, almost imperceptible sigh, a sound that spoke volumes of his own silent pressures. It confirmed Eleanor's suspicions. Victoria was pushing, and David, caught between his wife's ambition and his desire for peace, was simply acquiescing, eavesdropping. Eleanor takes a detour to the executive floor, overhearing Victoria's voice from a conference room. "Trust me, Marcus, it's a perfect arrangement." "I should probably let you get back to it then," Eleanor said, rising. "I'll just take a quick detour before I leave. I wanted to see if they'd finally replaced that old art piece on the executive floor. Arthur always hated it." David, preoccupied with his lunch, merely waved a distracted hand. "Sure, Mom. See you later." Eleanor smiled, a faint, knowing curve of her lips, and walked out. The detour was deliberate. As she approached the executive floor, the murmur of voices grew louder. From a partially open conference room door, Victoria's voice, sharp and confident, cut through the general hum of the office. "Trust me, Marcus," she was saying. "It's a perfect arrangement." The plot unveiled. Victoria promises Marcus Stone the contract if David gets the promotion. Boasting, Michael sees what I want him to see. He's so desperate for approval. Eleanor moved closer, hidden by a large, strategically placed potted plant, her heart pounding. Inside, Victoria was talking to a man Eleanor recognized as Marcus Stone, a notoriously ruthless but influential figure in the tech world. I'm telling you, Marcus, Victoria continued, her voice full of a dangerous self-assurance. You secured David that promotion, CEO for the Asian expansion, and the Westbrook contract for your firm is yours. Consider it a done deal. And don't worry about Michael Thompson, the head of the board. He sees what I want him to see. He's so desperate for approval, especially from David, that he'll sign off on anything I suggest. The unknown shareholder. Marcus asks about the unknown shareholder. Victoria dismisses it, believing David will inherit eventually. Marcus Stone, a cynical smirk on his face, raised an eyebrow. And what about the unknown shareholder? Victoria, the one holding 51%, doesn't their vote count for anything? Victoria laughed, a brittle, dismissive sound. Oh, that's just some old ghost, Marcus. Arthur's final folly. My husband will inherit it all eventually. It's just a matter of time. Right now, it's a passive, distant entity. No threat at all. Confirming suspicions. Eleanor hears sounds confirming her worst suspicions, feeling sick as she hurries away. Eleanor heard the clinking of glasses, then a soft, satisfied chuckle from Marcus, followed by Victoria's murmuring. The sounds confirmed her worst suspicions. They were making a deal, a backroom deal, trading David's career for Westbrook's valuable contracts, all to finance Victoria's ambition and solidify her future control, completely disregarding the welfare of the company and the wishes of its true owner. A cold wave of nausea washed over Eleanor. This wasn't just about disrespect anymore. This was about corporate manipulation and a blatant disregard for Arthur's legacy. She hurried away, the sound of their conspiratorial whispers echoing in her ears. Calling the cavalry. Back home, she calls Mr. Davies and Ms. Evans, explaining Victoria and Marcus's plot, linking it to the risky Asian expansion. Back in the quiet sanctuary of her home, Eleanor immediately called Mr. Davies, then, at his suggestion, Ms. Evans, a sharp, no-nonsense corporate lawyer on their legal team. She recounted everything, the overheard conversation, Victoria's arrogant boast, the mention of Marcus Stone and the risky Asian expansion contract. Her voice was calm now, a steely resolve replacing the initial shock. Long-term manipulation. Ms. Evans believes Victoria is planning for the long term, positioning herself for David's future inheritance. Ms. Evans listened, taking notes with crisp efficiency. This confirms my suspicions, Eleanor, she said gravely. Victoria isn't just looking at the immediate gain. She's planning for the long term. She's positioning herself and David to fully inherit and control Westbrook once your shares presumably pass to David. Mr. Davies added, she sees you as an obstacle to be managed, then removed. Retirement community. Scheme. Eleanor reveals Victoria's plan to move her to Sunset Valley Retirement Community by selling her paid-off house, calling it Getting Concerning. She already has a plan for my removal, Eleanor stated, her voice tight with suppressed anger. David told me she's looking at the Sunset Valley Retirement Community. The implication is, of course, that she'd sell my perfectly good paid-off house to fund it. She thinks she's being subtle, but it's clear. This isn't just about my comfort. It's about liquidating assets she perceives as mine for her own benefit. It's getting concerning, gentlemen, and Ms. Evans. A new strategy. Eleanor declares, I'm going to attend the board meeting next week, not as Eleanor Westbrook, but as Miss Wilson. Sometimes invisibility has its advantages. Mr. Davies and Ms. Evans exchanged a look. Eleanor, Mr. Davies began, what do you propose? Eleanor smiled, a slow, predatory curve of her lips. The board meeting is next week, isn't it? I believe I'll attend, not as Eleanor Westbrook, the Leech, but as Ms. Wilson, Mr. Davies' trusted associate, and my proxy. Sometimes, she mused, her eyes gleaming with a newfound fire, invisibility has its advantages. The morning of the board meeting dawned crisp and clear. a stark contrast to the storm brewing within Eleanor. She spent hours preparing, not just mentally, but physically. Ms. Evans had arranged for a discreet stylist, a true artist who understood the power of transformation. Eleanor's familiar silver-streaked hair was cut into a sharp, sophisticated bob and colored a rich, warm auburn, subtly softening her features while adding an undeniable edge. Her sensible wardrobe was replaced by a tailored, charcoal gray pantsuit, impeccably cut, paired with a silk blouse. A string of understated pearls and classic stud earrings completed the look. When she looked in the mirror, she didn't see Eleanor Westbrook, the unassuming widow. She saw Ms. Wilson, a woman of formidable presence and quiet authority. Transformation. Eleanor prepares for the board meeting, transformed by Ms. Evans's stylist into Ms. Wilson, a powerful businesswoman with a sleek bob and new hair color. Her reflection showed a woman who commanded respect, not through ostentatious display, but through an inherent strength and intelligence. The stylist had worked wonders, enhancing her natural beauty without making her unrecognizable. Her eyes, usually shadowed by a lifetime of quiet observation, now sparkled with a sharp, intelligent glint. Arthur's watch. She touches Arthur's gold watch, thinking, Arthur would hardly recognize me. He'd be proud. Eleanor reached for the solid gold pocket watch that had been Arthur's, his initials engraved on its back. She traced the cool metal with her thumb, a bittersweet smile playing on her lips. Arthur would hardly recognize me, she murmured, her voice a little husky. He'd be proud, though, I think. Proud that I'm standing up for what's right. The watch, a tangible link to her past and his legacy, felt like an anchor, grounding her in the present moment of momentous change. Boardroom entrance. Eleanor enters the top-floor boardroom with Ms. Evans. Heads turn. David looks nervous. Victoria and Marcus are together. Accompanied by Ms. Evans, Eleanor stepped into the top-floor boardroom of Westbrook Technologies. The room, a masterpiece of modern design with a panoramic view of the city, was already filled with the key players. Michael Thompson, the chairman of the board, various board members, and at the far end of the long mahogany table, David, looking nervous, next to Victoria, who radiated an air of self-importance. Beside Victoria sat Marcus Stone, a predatory gleam in his eyes. As Eleanor and Ms. Evans entered, a hush fell over the room. Heads turned, whispers rippled through the gathered executives. David looked up, his brow furrowed in confusion, clearly trying to place the striking, unfamiliar woman. Victoria, always self-absorbed, merely gave a dismissive flick of her gaze before returning to a hushed conversation with Marcus. The mysterious shareholder, Mr. Caldwell, introduces Ms. Wilson, the mysterious major shareholder, causing murmurs. David frowns, trying to place her. Michael Thompson, the chairman, cleared his throat, tapping a pen against the agenda. Ladies and gentlemen, we have two new attendees today. First, our legal counsel, Ms. Evans, who I believe most of you know. And second, joining us as a representative of our majority shareholder, please welcome Ms. Wilson. A fresh wave of murmurs broke out. The majority shareholder was an enigma, a name on paper, a quiet force through proxy. No one had ever actually met them. David's frown deepened. He stared at Eleanor, his eyes lingering, a flicker of recognition in their depths, but quickly dismissed as impossible. David's presentation. David presents his ambitious, bordering on fantasy, Asian market expansion proposal, projecting a 27% ROI. The meeting commenced with David as CEO presenting his proposal for a major expansion into the Asian market. He spoke with passion and conviction, detailing projected growth and revenue streams. However, Eleanor, with her intimate knowledge of Westbrook's history and market realities, found his projections, a staggering 27% ROI, to be wildly optimistic, bordering on fantasy. It was an ambitious plan, clearly designed to impress, but it lacked the meticulous, cautious approach that had defined Arthur's every move. He glossed over potential risks, focusing solely on the glittering promise of exponential growth. Marcus's endorsement. Marcus enthusiastically supports it, offering his consultancy's extensive connections to facilitate entry. As David concluded, Marcus Stone was the first to speak. He launched into an enthusiastic endorsement of the proposal, his voice booming with feigned admiration. He lauded David's vision and bold leadership, then smoothly pivoted to offer the services of his own consultancy firm, Stone Global. My firm, Marcus declared, has extensive connections in the Asian market. We can facilitate entry, navigate the regulatory hurdles, and ensure this ambitious venture achieves its projected success. He made it sound indispensable, an integral part of the deal. Eleanor's challenge, Eleanor, as Ms. Wilson, clears her throat, saying, "Mr. Westbrook, your enthusiasm is commendable. However, I see several flaws." Eleanor, as Ms. Wilson, waited for the appropriate moment. When Marcus finished his eloquent pitch, she cleared her throat, a small, polite sound that nevertheless commanded attention. All eyes turned to her. Her voice, calm and measured, filled the room. "Mr. Westbrook," she began, her gaze meeting David's, who flinched slightly at the direct address. "Your enthusiasm is certainly commendable. However, as an investor keenly interested in the long-term prosperity of Westbrook Technologies, I must point out several significant flaws in your proposal, particularly regarding its financial projections and the rather aggressive timeline." Victoria's outburst. Victoria interrupts. "Who exactly are you to question this proposal? Michael has worked extremely hard." Victoria, her face a mask of indignation, couldn't contain herself. She practically leaped from her seat. "Excuse me," she interjected, her voice sharp with barely concealed fury. "Who exactly are you to question this proposal? David has worked extremely hard on this, and it has the full backing of the board members who actually matter." Her eyes, narrowed and hostile, darted between Eleanor and Miss Evans. Eleanor's firmness. Eleanor maintains, "I'm simply doing due diligence as a major investor. Your husband's proposal risks millions, influenced by outside interests." Eleanor met Victoria's glare with a cool, unblinking gaze. "Madam," she replied, her voice steady and firm, "I am simply doing my due diligence as a major investor in this company. Your husband's proposal, while ambitious, risks millions, if not billions, of company assets on highly speculative gains. Furthermore, it appears to be unduly influenced by outside interests, particularly Mr. Stone's firm, whose role in this expansion seems to extend beyond a mere consultancy." She paused, allowing the implication to hang in the air. Proposal tabled. Eleanor moves to table this proposal pending further review and investigate Mr. Stone's relationship with Westbrook Technologies. The vote is decisive. Then, with an air of quiet authority, Eleanor continued, "Therefore, I move that we table this proposal pending a thorough, independent review of its financial viability and a comprehensive investigation into Mr. Stone's current and past relationship with Westbrook Technologies, including any undisclosed conflicts of interest." The room was silent, save for a collective intake of breath. Michael Thompson, flustered, looked around. "A motion has been made," he stammered. The vote was swift and decisive. With the implicit power of the majority shareholder behind her, the board members, suddenly cautious, voted overwhelmingly to table the proposal. David looked stunned. Victoria's face was a thundercloud. David's recognition. As Victoria storms out, Eleanor offers David advice. He looks up, asking, "Have we met before? You seem familiar." She replies, "Perhaps in passing I knew your father." Victoria, unable to contain her rage, slammed her hand on the table and stormed out of the boardroom, Marcus Stone trailing sheepishly behind her. As the other board members began to disperse, Eleanor approached David, who sat slumped in his chair, looking utterly defeated. "David," she said, her voice softening, but still professional, "this is a setback perhaps, but it's also an opportunity. Re-evaluate. Base your decisions on sound data, not just ambition or external pressures." David looked up, his eyes meeting hers. A flicker of something, a distant memory perhaps, crossed his face. "Have we met before?" he asked, his voice hesitant. "You seem familiar." Eleanor smiled, a small knowing smile. "Perhaps in passing, David, I knew your father." The truth awaits. In the elevator, Eleanor decides, it's time to tell David the truth. I'll invite him to dinner tomorrow alone. Later, as the elevator doors closed on the top floor, Eleanor stood beside Ms. Evans, a quiet sense of triumph and a deeper resolve settling within her. "It's time," she declared. her voice firm. It's time to tell David the truth. He needs to know what he's truly inherited and what he's risking. I'll invite him to dinner tomorrow, alone. If you've been gripped by Eleanor's incredible journey of quiet strength and impending revelation, then you absolutely won't want to miss what happens next. The truth is finally out, and the fallout is about to be explosive. Hit that like button, share this story with everyone who needs to hear it, and make sure you subscribe so you don't miss a single moment of this epic confrontation. The promise of a quiet dinner with David, a chance to finally unveil the truth on her own terms, was shattered by an urgent phone call early the next morning. It was Mr. Davies, his voice tight with concern. "Eleanor," he began, without preamble, "Victoria's made a move, a big one. She's convinced David to call an emergency board meeting for tomorrow morning." Emergency call. The next morning, Mr. Davies calls. "Victoria's made a move. She's convinced David to call an emergency board meeting for tomorrow morning." Eleanor felt a cold knot tighten in her stomach. "What's her agenda?" she asked, her voice steady despite the unease swirling within her. Victoria's countermove. "They plan a restructuring of the executive team to remove loyal board members. Victoria also gotten wind that Miss Wilson is connected to you. She's pushing for a complete restructuring of the executive team," Mr. Davies explained, his words clipped and precise. "She's targeting the board members who sided with Ms. Wilson yesterday, the ones loyal to the original vision. And she's gotten wind that Ms. Wilson is connected to you, Eleanor. She's probably piecing it together, or at least suspicious enough to act." Eleanor's mind raced. Victoria was acting fast, ruthlessly. She wouldn't just try to remove her perceived obstacles. She would try to dismantle the very structure that protected Arthur's legacy. David's arrival. The doorbell rings. David is on the porch. Expression stormy. He pushes past Eleanor. "Were you ever going to tell me, or was the plan to keep lying to me forever?" Just as Mr. Davies finished speaking, the doorbell chimed, a harsh, insistent sound. Eleanor glanced at the clock. It was far too early for visitors. A sense of dread washed over her. "Mr. Davies, I have to go. Someone's at the door." She hung up and walked to the front door, her heart pounding. Through the glass panel, she saw David. His face was stormy, his jaw clenched, his eyes blazing with a mixture of anger and betrayal. He didn't wait for her to fully open the door, pushing past her into the living room, his gaze sweeping over the modest furnishings. "Were you ever going to tell me?" he demanded, his voice low and furious, echoing slightly in the quiet space. "Or was the plan to keep lying to me forever?" The full confession. Eleanor calms him, confirming, "Yes, your father and I founded the company before you were born. I own 51% of Westbrook." Eleanor closed the door behind him, taking a deep breath. She knew this moment was inevitable, but she had hoped to control its timing, its context. "David," she said, her voice soft but firm, "please sit down. Let's talk." He ignored her, pacing restlessly. "Talk about what? About the years of lies? About how you've watched me, let me struggle, pretending you were just a struggling widow? Is that it?" Eleanor's heart ached, but she stood her ground. "Yes, David, your father and I founded the company before you were born. Every penny, every late night, every sacrifice, we built Westbrook Technologies. And yes, I own 51% of it." David's betrayal. David feels humiliated. "All these years, you've been living here in this modest house, while you were worth millions." David stopped pacing, staring at her, his face a mask of disbelief and hurt. "All these years," he repeated, his voice barely a whisper, "you've been living here in this modest house, wearing those clothes, driving that car, while you were worth millions? Billions? Do you have any idea how that feels, Mom? To find out your whole life has been a lie? To feel like a complete fool, a puppet?" The humiliation in his voice was raw, palpable. "Arthur's wish," explained. Eleanor explains Arthur's wish. "He wanted you to succeed on your own merits, not because you were the owner's son, from never knowing if you'd earned your position." "It was your father's wish, David," Eleanor explained, her voice trembling slightly. "His dying wish. He wanted you to succeed on your own merits, to forge your own path, not to simply inherit an empire you hadn't built. He feared you would never truly know if you'd earned your position, if you'd built your own legacy, if you knew the company was simply handed to you. He wanted you to experience the journey, the struggle, the triumph for yourself. She gestured around the room. This house, this life, it was part of that promise. To shield you, to allow you to grow without the overwhelming shadow of his legacy or the burden of immense wealth until you were truly ready. David's questions. David demands answers about the tabled proposal. Eleanor cautiously explains concerns about Marcus Stone's involvement. David ran a hand through his hair, his anger slowly giving way to confusion. So, Ms. Wilson, he began, his voice laced with dawning realization. That was you. You're the reason my Asian expansion proposal was tabled. Why? It's a brilliant plan, Mom. Eleanor nodded. Yes, that was me. And the plan, David, while ambitious, had serious flaws. It put Westbrook at unnecessary risk. My concern, as the majority shareholder, was primarily about Marcus Stone's involvement. Victoria's influence. David defends Marcus, repeating Victoria's words. She says he's brilliant. The board is too conservative. David's anger flared again. Marcus is brilliant. Victoria says he's exactly what the company needs. She says the board is too conservative, holding us back. He was repeating Victoria's words verbatim, a painful echo that tightened Eleanor's stomach. Evidence of deceptions. Eleanor gives David a folder detailing Marcus's failed ventures. 3 companies that invested, all 3 suffered significant losses. Eleanor walked to a small, antique desk, pulling out a slim, manila folder. Brilliant, perhaps, at making promises, she said, her voice devoid of emotion. But look at this, David. This is a dossier on Marcus Stone's previous ventures. 3 companies, similar to Westbrook, that invested heavily based on his extensive connections and aggressive expansion strategies. All 3 suffered significant losses, nearly to the point of bankruptcy, before he extracted himself with his consultancy fees intact. She handed him the folder. Open it. Read it. Protecting interests. Eleanor asked David to consider why Victoria found the information so quickly, suggesting Victoria was protecting her own interests. David hesitated, then slowly opened the folder, his eyes scanning the documents. A flicker of doubt, then alarm crossed his face. How did you get this? He stammered. Eleanor leaned against the desk. I have resources, David. More importantly, ask yourself why Victoria, who is so eager for this deal to go through, didn't find this information herself, or why she dismissed the idea of an unknown shareholder so readily. She was protecting her own interests, David. Not yours, and certainly not Westbrook's. David's doubt, David admits. I need time to think. But Eleanor urges him, look at that folder and ask yourself why Victoria is pushing so hard for this restructuring. He closed the folder slowly, his face pale. The fire in his eyes had been replaced by a deep-seated uncertainty. I need time to think, he admitted, his voice barely audible. Eleanor nodded. Of course, but before tomorrow's emergency board meeting, David, look at that folder and ask yourself why Victoria is pushing so hard for this restructuring. Who benefits the most if the loyal board members are removed and the path is cleared for this reckless expansion? A silent ally. After David leaves, Eleanor receives a text from Laura, Arthur's niece, with a photo of David, Victoria, and Marcus, planning something bigger than a restructuring. Be prepared. David stood, the folder clutched in his hand, his eyes distant. He nodded a silent acknowledgement before turning and leaving, the front door closing softly behind him. Eleanor watched him go, a mix of hope and anxiety swirling within her. Had she finally broken through Victoria's carefully constructed facade? Moments later, her phone buzzed. It was a text from Laura, Arthur's niece, who had always maintained a quiet loyalty to Eleanor. Attached was a candid photo. David, Victoria, and Marcus Stone huddled together outside a private dining room, looking intensely conspiratorial. The caption read, "They're planning something bigger than a restructuring, Aunt Eleanor. Be prepared. They're moving fast." The emergency board meeting crackled with an almost palpable tension. The air felt charged, expectant. As the last board members shuffled into their seats, the grand double doors of the boardroom swung open. Eleanor walked in, not as the unassuming widow, not as the mysterious Ms. Wilson, but as Eleanor Westbrook. She wore a simple, impeccably tailored navy suit, elegant in its understatement, a stark contrast to the more flamboyant attire of the other women. On her wrist, Arthur's gold watch glinted softly, a silent testament to the legacy she was there to reclaim. Her hair, still the rich auburn from her transformation, framed a face that held both a profound sadness and an unshakable resolve. Eleanor's grand entrance. Eleanor walks into the boardroom, no disguise, in a simple but elegant navy suit, Arthur's watch on her wrist. Every head in the room turned. David, sitting beside Victoria, gasped audibly. His eyes, wide with shock, met hers, a kaleidoscope of emotions, confusion, dawning realization, and perhaps a flicker of guilt, warring within their depths. Victoria, however, was a portrait of pure, unadulterated fury. Victoria's shock. Victoria is slapped by Eleanor's presence, demanding, "What is she doing here? This is a closed board meeting." "What is she doing here?" Victoria shrieked, her voice cutting through the stunned silence. She pointed a trembling finger at Eleanor. "This is a closed board meeting. Get her out of here." Her face was flushed, her composure entirely lost. The very sight of Eleanor, now transformed, poised, and utterly confident, seemed to slap her across the face. The official reveal, Mr. Davies announces, was Westbrook is here in her capacity as majority shareholder. She holds 51% of the company shares. A gasp ripples through the room. Mr. Davies, already seated at the table, rose with a calm, deliberate movement. "If I may, Mrs. Westbrook is here in her full capacity as the majority shareholder of Westbrook Technologies," he announced, his voice clear and resonant. He paused, letting the words sink in. "She holds 51% of the company shares." A collective gasp rippled through the room. Board members exchanged wide-eyed glances. Michael Thompson, the chairman, looked as though he might faint. David stared at his mother, his jaw slack. Documentation confirmed. James confirms Eleanor's documentation and her role as Ms. Wilson, when necessary. Marcus's composure cracks. James, the company's internal legal counsel, quickly confirmed, "The documentation is impeccable, Chairman. And for the record, Ms. Wilson, who intervened in yesterday's meeting, was indeed Mrs. Westbrook, acting as her own proxy." The confirmation landed like a hammer blow. Marcus Stone, who had been trying to maintain a veneer of aloof amusement, finally lost his composure. A vein throbbed in his temple, his eyes darting frantically between Eleanor and Victoria. David's new agenda. Mr. Caldwell asks David to proceed with the restructuring. David clears his throat. "Actually, in light of recent information, I'd like to propose a different agenda." Mr. Caldwell, visibly flustered, turned to David. "Mr. Westbrook, if you would, please proceed with the agenda for the emergency restructuring." David, however, cleared his throat, his gaze still fixed on Eleanor, now standing at the head of the table. His voice was steady, though a tremor of emotion underscored it. "Actually, Mr. Caldwell," David said, his eyes now finding Victoria's, then Marcus's. "In light of recent information, I'd like to propose a different agenda." Withdrawal of proposal. David reveals his research on Marcus's troubling inconsistencies and manipulated data in his proposal, which Victoria helped prepare. He pulled out the folder Eleanor had given him, its contents clearly weighing heavily on his conscience. "I've spent the night reviewing the Asian expansion proposal," David continued, his voice growing stronger with each word, "and unfortunately, I've found some troubling inconsistencies. Specifically, Mr. Stone's past dealings in what appears to be manipulated data in the projected returns, data, I might add, which Victoria helped prepare." He glanced at Victoria, a look of profound disappointment on his face. She paled, her eyes widening in panic. Unmasking Marcus. Eleanor reveals Marcus's silent partnership and consulting fees with the recommended Asian manufacturing partner. Eleanor stepped forward, her voice cutting through the stunned silence. "And further to that point," she added, her eyes fixed on Marcus Stone, who visibly recoiled, "Mr. Stone, perhaps you'd care to disclose your silent partnership and the extensive consulting fees you've arranged with the very Asian manufacturing partner you so enthusiastically recommended for Westbrook Technologies? Marcus Stone's face turned ashen. The room erupted in gasps and angry murmurs. David's choice. David faces Victoria. No, Sophie, I'm stopping us from making a terrible mistake. Just like I'm stopping us from making a terrible mistake about my mother. Victoria lunged to her feet. David, what are you doing? She hissed, her voice a desperate, frantic whisper. This is madness. David looked at her, his expression hardened with a painful clarity. No, Victoria, he corrected, using her given name. Sophie, which he rarely did. I'm stopping us from making a terrible mistake that would have cost this company millions. Just like I'm stopping us from making a terrible mistake about my mother. Boom. Victoria's venom. Victoria venomously attacks Eleanor, but David retorts, my mother has been honoring my father's wishes while protecting the company. You did it out of greed. Victoria's fury turned on Eleanor. You manipulative old woman. You planned this. You've ruined everything. Her words dripped with venom, echoing the Leech insult. But before Eleanor could respond, David stepped in front of her. My mother, he stated, his voice ringing with a newfound authority, has been honoring my father's wishes, protecting this company, and allowing me to grow and learn, while you, he turned back to Victoria, his gaze unwavering, you did it out of pure greed, out of a desire for status, and a willingness to compromise the very integrity of Westbrook Technologies for a larger house. Victoria, utterly defeated, gathered her things and stormed out. Her exit this time met with cold, unforgiving silence. Marcus Stone, looking utterly humiliated, followed her, his career likely in tatters, mother and son. Reconciliation, alone, David admits. I'm still angry with you. You should have told me the truth. Eleanor admits her fear of losing him. Later that evening in Eleanor's quiet living room, David sat across from her. The anger had faded, replaced by a deep sadness and a profound sense of introspection. I'm still angry with you, Sam, he admitted, his voice raw. You should have told me the truth. Eleanor reached across the coffee table, taking his hand. I know, my dear, and I understand. I was afraid of losing you, of changing the man you were becoming. Your father's wish, it was a heavy burden, but I truly believed it was for your benefit. David's new path, David, having packed the bag to leave Victoria, takes Eleanor's hand. She tells him, you're a good businessman, David. Sophie, also your decision. He squeezed her hand. I packed a bag, he said softly. I'm staying at a hotel tonight. The implication was clear. His marriage to Victoria was over. Eleanor nodded, a fresh wave of grief for what might have been, for the family she had tried to hold together washing over her. You're a good businessman, David, she told him, her eyes shining with pride. You proved that today. You made the right choice, even when it was difficult. She paused. And Sophie, that's also your decision. He nodded, a weary but determined look on his face. Westbrook and Wilson Technologies. 2 months later, Eleanor watches David present a new proposal. Later, on the porch, David suggests renaming the company Westbrook and Wilson Technologies to honor both legacies. Eleanor, finally stepping into the light, agrees. 2 months later, Eleanor sat in the back of the newly refurbished boardroom, watching David present a revised, meticulously researched proposal for sustainable, ethical expansion. His voice was confident, his arguments sound, and his integrity shone through. He was no longer a puppet, but a true leader. Later, on the porch of her home, the evening sun casting long shadows, David sat beside her. Mom, he began, a thoughtful expression on his face. I've been thinking. Westbrook Technologies. It's a tribute to Dad, but it's also yours. Everything we've built, everything we're going to build. I think it's time we honored both legacies. He turned to her, a genuine smile lighting his face. How about we rename the company Westbrook and Wilson Technologies? Eleanor's eyes welled with tears, but this time, they were tears of joy. She squeezed his hand. Westbrook and Wilson Technologies, she repeated, the name rolling off her tongue with a sense of rightness. She had lived in the shadows for so long, but now, finally, Eleanor Westbrook was stepping into the light, ready to build a new, stronger legacy with her son by her side.